Hello, fictional. Welcome to the What If Essay. Today we are gonna see what if Issei become a god hunters. If you end up liking this video, please consider subscribe, so without further ado, let's get into the video. Issei thought it couldn't get any stranger, but strange things have been happening all around him lately. He tried to think back to when all these peculiar occurrences started. He looked up at the ceiling and drew to the conclusion that it all started the day he joined the Occult Research Club. That must be it, he thought to himself. When he first joined the club nothing particularly strange had happened, well to be quite frank, it was positively boring. All they did was sit around a room in the moldy old school building that seemed to be barely holding together. Dust coated the windows, and the wooden floorboards creaked with every step. It was a wonder why such a building was never demolished to make way for a new building in its place. The club room was in no better condition either. All there were was a bunch of old sofas that looked like they belonged in Victorian-era Europe, and a collection of knickknacks that looked more or less like useless junk. Issei thought himself to be a bit out of place at the school, but these students looked more so than himself. There was the first-year Kaneko, who always seemed to be quietly eating some kind of snacks and staring off into space, her eyes always following some kind of unseen entity. The second-year, Kiba, who did little more than look up from his books to acknowledge anyone else in the room. Another first-year, Gasper, who would have been a cute girl if not for the fact that he was actually a girly boy who cross-dressed in girls' clothes. All he did was sit in his box in the corner and stare at the computer screen all day. Issei never really understood why he had come to this place at all, but his feet seemed to have carried him here. As he was about to turn around to leave, the president of the club walked in, Ria's Gremory. The crimson-haired goddess herself. She smiled brightly at him as she walked past, with her vice president in tow, Akeno Himejima. No one would ever believe that these two legendary beauties are members of this strange club. Issei figured he'd have to stick around and try to solve this mystery on his own. Although strange as it was to have those two be his club's president and vice president, there wasn't anything out of the ordinary about it. In fact, they rarely seemed to talk about anything remotely of the occult at all. It seemed more like a place for people to hang out rather than an actual club. After a quiet first day, Issei begins his walk home staring up at the sky. He grins to himself thinking about how he is going to brag to Mitsuda and Motohama about his luck. He couldn't wait to see the dumb looks on their faces. Wham! Issei could feel the pain in his knees, telling him that he had fallen on the ground. Realizing that he must have walked into someone, he began to apologize and rose his head to find himself staring at what could only be a white pair of panties in front of his face. It happened so suddenly. A blood-curdling shriek followed by a sharp slap to the face. Issei was sitting on the ground tenderly rubbing his cheek. "Pervert," said the girl standing over him. Issei looked her over. She was a cute girl with long auburn hair pulled back into ponytail with frosted tips. He recognized a school uniform as his own, but did not recognize the girl. "Sorry for knocking you over," she muttered quietly before running off again. "Hey wait," he called out to her but she was already gone. Issei wasn't even able to get her name, but he was sure he'd look for her at school tomorrow. He dusted himself off and looked around to see if he had dropped anything after walking into that girl. Seeing a glimmer of light on the ground, he picked up a small ball. For its size, it was quite light and smooth to the touch. It seemed to be a large pearl, but to his knowledge no such pearl the size of a tennis ball existed. Figuring it was the girl's, he would have an excuse to go looking for her tomorrow. At night, Issei lay in bed staring at the iridescent ball in his hand, wondering what exactly it was for. It was warm to the touch and seemed to radiate light of its own accord. It was an odd thing for a girl to be carrying around. Maybe it a sports ball of some kind, thought Issei. He tossed it in the air and held out his hand ready to catch it again. But he was shocked when it didn't fall back down. He tumbled out of bed and stared at the ball which hovered in midair. What the hell kind of ball is this? He carefully plucked it out of the air, as if it were held up by some kind of invisible string. He rolled it in his hands, checking it over once more, but found nothing. Again he tossed the ball up in the air, and again it hovered as soon as it reached its highest arch. This time he dropped it out of his hands. It started its descent like it normally would, but seemed to slow before landing softly on the ground, as if someone or something had just placed it there. This mysterious ball was definitely occult-worthy. The next day Issei walked by the same spot where he had bumped into that girl, and sure enough there she was searching all over the ground. She was on her hands and knees searching every bit of the sidewalk. Issei froze in his tracks, spying a pair of pink panties peeking out from under her skirt. Feeling like she was being watched, she looked over her shoulder and quickly covered them. "You saw them again, didn't you?" she asked, blushing furiously at him. He wanted to tell her that he didn't, but his conscience got the better of him. "Just a little bit," he said, blushing slightly. She stormed over to him and was about ready to slap him again when she noticed the ball in his hand. "Oh, you found it." "Just a minute," said Issei, holding the ball up high. "What is this thing?" "It's mine," said the girl, jumping up trying to snatch the ball that was out of his reach. "I just want to know what this is," said Issei, holding her back. "Give it back." she said, still trying to get to the ball. This game of keep away continued on for a few more minutes, but she refused to tell him what this mysterious ball is. It is nothing to you, she said, tears welling up in her eyes. But it means everything to me. She stopped reaching for the ball and turned away from him. Are you crying? Asked Issei, feeling guilty for not returning her lost property. No, she mumbled, trying to dry her eyes with the sleeves of her shirt. I'll do anything you want, I just want it back. A dirty thought had crossed Issei's mind. But seeing her crying her eyes out over the ball gave him a change of heart. Here, he said, holding the ball out to her. Take it. She wiped her eyes one more time before looking up at him. She hesitated, sensing there's some kind of catch involved. But she slowly wrapped her fingers around ball and removed it from his hand. Thank you for finding it, she said, hugging the ball tightly to her chest. Don't mention it, said Issei, looking away after seeing the ball nestled in between her breasts. Why do you want to know what this is anyway? She asked, finally calming down. Huh? Oh, because I'm a member of the Occult Research Club, said Issei sheepishly. It's our duty to investigate strange things. Oh, she said. The school bell rang out. Oh no, he said. We are going to be late. They quickly ran towards the school and changed out of their street shoes. See ya, he called out to her before running up the stairs to his classroom. See you, she said, even though he had long since gone. In class, the only thing Issei could think about was that girl. I'll do anything you want, Issei quickly stood up from his seat, nearly knocking over his and Mitsuda's lunches to the floor. Everyone around him began to stare. What the heck, man? Asked Mitsuda. Ice? Asked Motohama with his chopstick still in his mouth. I forgot to ask her, said Issei, not realizing how stupid he was. Ask who? Asked Mitsuda. That girl, said Issei, grabbing him by his collar as if he wasn't understanding something so important. Speak in complete sentences, idiot, said Mitsuda, trying to shove him away. I forgot to ask that girl her name, said Issei finally. Ice. Mitsuda put his hands on his shoulders. Why didn't you say so? Motohama. Time to deploy the scouter. Right now. Nothing is more important, said Motohama, adjusting his glasses. Than girls. They made their way up to the school rooftop where they began to scan the school for Issei's mysterious girl. Do you see anything? Asked Mitsuda, crowding next to Motohama. Issei looked on but didn't see the girl auburn hair. Feeling defeated, he and the others slowly made their way back to class in time for their next class period. The rest of the day continued on without much incident. No matter how hard he tried to find the girl, she was nowhere to be found. Even after asking several first years, they all claimed to have never heard of this auburn-haired girl with frosted tips. So he did the only thing he could think of, retreat to the safety of the Occult Research Club and bask in the glorious beauty of his seniors. As he shuffled along down the hallway, someone quickly yanked hard on his collar, dragging him into an empty classroom. What the hell? He protested, massaging his neck after being rough-handled. Sorry, apologized the auburn-haired girl. Oh, it's you, said Issei, giving her a small smile. I have a name, she pouted. Oh, I guess we never properly introduced ourselves. My name is Hayami Sayori. Hyoudou Issei, he replied. Why did you drag me in here? Said Sayori, rubbing her arm nervously. I told you I would do anything you wanted, right? Oh, said Issei, remembering the dirty images in his head. Forget about that. But before he could get another syllable out of his mouth, Sayori slowly began to unbutton her top. She was blushing furiously and couldn't bear to look him in his eyes. Issei couldn't believe his eyes. The heart in his chest felt like it was about to burst right out of his chest and bury itself deep within her soft breasts. Just as she was about to undo her next button of her blouse, revealing a pink bra hidden beneath, he quickly turned around. What are you doing? Even though he wanted to keep watching, he was too embarrassed to continue. I thought that was what you wanted. Asked Sayori, taking a daring step closer to him. Isn't this what you were thinking? What I was. He quickly supped around and looked her in the eyes. You can read my mind. Even though she was still blushing furiously and embarrassed, she continued to stare back into his. I can. But it is not like it was hard to tell that this was what you wanted. Well, said Issei, giving a small chuckle. So true, so true. But how can you read my mind? Said Sayori as it was her turn to turn away from him. Don't freak out, alright? Why would I freak out? Slowly she ran her hands through her long hair, and in their wake 2 triangle ears seemingly popped out of nowhere. And from under her skirt a large fluffy fox tail the same color of her hair began to emerge. She spun around and said, I'm a fox spirit. Issei blinked several times and began to clean out his ears. I'm sorry, but I thought I heard you say that you were a fox spirit. She nodded her head. See. She twitched the triangle-shaped ears on her head and swished her long fluffy tail. I'm actually a QB, though I am not sure what happened to the rest of my tails. Issei. I want to, said Issei, slowly shuffling his feet forward. Huh? I want to touch them, said Issei, his eyes looked malicious. Realizing that her blouse had become even more undone, she quickly closed it shut and slowly backed away from him. Issei. Wait. She found herself back up against the wall staring at him, arms outstretched. She could tell that he wanted to grope her. Dirty thoughts began to form in her head which caused her to blush furiously. But this was what she had seen in his head earlier. She shut her eyes and waited for fingers to spider their way along her body. So soft. Huh? She asked, feeling something grabbing at her ears. Issei was standing over her, rubbing both her ears with his fingers. They are so soft. She let out a sigh of relief but noticed that his eyes had wandered down to her tail. Can I touch that too? He asked. No. 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 She said, scooting down the wall away from him, hugging her bushy tail closely. I'm sorry, but I don't like anyone touching my tail. Oh, said Issei. Now that I got that out of my system. So you are a fox spirit. She nodded her head. So that ball that you dropped yesterday, said Issei. That was my magic, said Sayori, producing the ball from her person. Without it I am no more magical than you humans. I see, said Issei. Well, that explains a lot. So you, said Sayori, shyly burying her face in her tail. You aren't freaked out? Huh? Why? Asked Issei. I think it's awesome. She smiled into her tail. I can't wait to tell the club what I found, said Issei triumphantly. He imagined himself be fawned over by his seniors for finding a real live fox spirit. No, you mustn't, said Sayori, interrupting his fantasy. Why not? Issei, I want you to stay away from them, she said, holding his hands. They are dangerous people. Why not? I mean, they may seem a little strange. Promise me that you won't even go near them again, she pleaded, pulling his hands to her chest. Promise me. Sure, said Issei, feeling her soft skin rubbing against his. He could feel himself blushing again. This was the first time in his entire life he was touching a girl's exposed chest. But why? He managed to ask. There are people out there who want to hurt spirits like me, she told him. So you mustn't tell anyone about what I really am. No, not even Mitsuda or Motohama. No one. Why are there people who want to hurt you? Demanded Issei. Because they are dangerous, said Ria, standing in the threshold of the door. Senpai, said Issei. I thought my barrier would be strong enough, said Sayori, who hid behind him. Move away from her, Issei, said Race, taking a step into the room. Issei could hear something like glass shatter in the distance. The room seemed a little less empty now. She's been feeding off of your life energy all this time. No. No, I haven't. Sayori pleaded behind Issei. Senpai, what is going on? Asked Issei, continuing to shield Sayori. She is a fox spirit, said Race, gliding towards them. She lures victims into her den to feed on their energy. No, that's not true. Said Sayori. I haven't done anything. We have been monitoring you ever since you stepped foot in school, said Race, as more of the members of the Occult Research Club entered the room. We know you are responsible. That wasn't me. I swear. It is hard to trust the words of a fox, said Riaz, folding her arms across her chest. Senpai, said Issei, taking a step forward. Just who are you? We are god hunters. Issei couldn't believe what he was seeing in front of him. Sayori, feeling like a cornered animal with no other options, lunged at them. Her fingernails had turned into sharp claws that sliced through desks and chairs with ease. She slashed at Kaneko, who deflected the attack with her arm and landed a kick which sent Sayori flying across the room. She rebounded off the wall and lunged forward at Kiba, who was now holding a sword conjured from thin air. It looked unwieldy and clumsy, but he seemed to be managing on his own. Swinging, parrying and deflecting the fox's attacks. She jumped back and held up her hands, which now had ball of fire in them. Throwing them at Kiba, he managed to dodge the first few but seemed unable to dodge the next wave. Which Akeno stepped in, deflecting them with her bare hands. She seemed to be enjoying herself as she sent bolts of lightning at Sayori, who wasn't quick enough to dodge them all. This is her true nature, said Riaz, putting an arm around his chest and hugged him closely. She would have taken all of your energy and left you for dead. Issei continued to watch as Sayori picked herself up, obviously injured but not giving up without a fight. She did a quick motion with her hand, several copies of herself appeared, all charged forward. Kiba and Kaneko leaped towards them, slicing and punching as many as they could, which dispersed the magic. But they still didn't know which was the original. One of the Sayori lunged at Issei and Ria's arm outstretched, claws ready to strike. No, it wasn't an attack, it was a plea for help. Akeno filled the room with lightning, quickly shocking all of the Saras, dispersing them back into air. Only the original was left curled up in pain in front of Issei. She still had claws and fangs, but Issei couldn't help but feel sorry for her. Her attacks seemed more like acts of desperation than attacks of a killer. He knelt down next to her and looked her in the eyes. Why did you choose me? He asked. Why? Because you found my magic. I want the truth. Feeling defeated, she frowned and looked down at his feet. You have something that I need, she said, her ears drooping a little. I thought so, said Riaz, kneeling next to him. She looked up at him, tears streaming down her face. I never meant to hurt you. I really didn't. But you have something I need to save my mother. What? I don't have anything, said Issei, shaking his head. I really don't. All the stuff I have is junk. It is not something you own, said Riaz. You are special. You have something called a sacred gear. Sacred gear? Riaz held up his left arm for him to see. Sacred gears are objects that God has put in humans to help defend themselves from all sorts of things. I do? Asked Issei. I don't feel any special. Most people don't realize they have it until much later, said Riaz, intertwining her fingers into his own. So what is it? Asked Issei, beginning to blush as this was the first time a girl was holding his hand. I don't know which one you have, said Riaz, smiling at him. But I know you have one. Otherwise you wouldn't have found your way to my club. Do you know which one he has? Asked Kiba, but still had his sword ready. Not exactly, said Sayori, shaking her head. But its power is what drew me to it. I am sorry, Issei, said Riaz, but this is not the way that I intended for you to find out. Let's return to the club room. Oh, said Issei, helping her back up to her feet. Wait, what about Sayori? Don't worry, said Akeno, licking her lips seductively. I can take care of her. I'm sorry, Issei, said Sayori, looking up at him. Come to think of it. We haven't even said goodbye properly. Goodbye, Issei. Riaz led Issei out of the classroom where Akeno and the others stood over Sayori, who continued to lay on the ground defeated. Promise, he heard Kaneko say softly, which seemed to trigger something in his head. Wait, said Issei, spinning back around. You said you would promise me that you would do anything. The others stared at him. I found your magic, said Issei, standing over her. And you said you would promise to do anything for me. Sayori sat up to look at him better. I did. You didn't fulfill your promise, said Issei, who seemed to be filling with rage. Sayori began to blush furiously. Now? Issei nodded his head. I said, Sayori, looking down at the tattered remains of her clothes. She realized that she had barely anything left. Sure. She closed her eyes and lifted her head, waiting for Issei to come at him. She could feel his body getting closer. Her heart was beating faster and faster. Thought that this was the least she could do before she was to be executed. She could feel his breath on her skin, the smell of his body so close to hers. She figured it was a fitting end to offer him his promise before the end, like how she was about to before ending him. For the second time today, she was surprised by him. He wrapped his arms around her body and hugged her tight. Issei? She asked. Promise me that you will always stay with me, he whispered into her ear. She could feel the tears rolling down his cheeks and onto her bare skin. They felt so warm to her. I promise, she said, hugging him back, nuzzling his neck. The two became intertwined with a halo of golden light that illuminated the entire room for a moment before dying away. What a pity, pouted Akeno. Looks like you won't be getting to play around today, said Kiba, sheathing his sword, which disappeared into nothingness. They left the classroom, leaving the two of them alone. What happened? Asked Issei, pulling away from her. Your promise, said Sayori, wiping her eyes. I have to fulfill your promise. One thing that foxes don't take lightly, it is promises. Humans and others may take it lightly, but foxes never do. It is the strongest magic that we know. So does this mean, said Issei sheepishly. I mean, can I? She pushed him away and quickly covered herself up. One promise only, she said, sticking her tongue out at him. I knew I should have said to be my sex partner for life, groaned Issei. What? Asked Sayori, glaring at him. Nothing. Nothing. Said Issei, waving his hands. I can read minds, you know, she said. Don't you think we should head to the club room now? Senpai is probably waiting for us, said Issei, changing the subject. You know your promise said I had to stay with you, said Sayori. It said nothing about the condition which you had to be in. Are you really okay with this? Asked Akeno to Riaz as they walked down the hall. There isn't much of a choice we have in the matter, said Riaz, shrugging her shoulders. It was his decision. She is the least of our concerns anyway. There are only going to be stronger foes who will want his power. I wasn't talking about his safety, said Akeno, winking at her. Sounds like he wants to make her his bride. Riaz continued to walk past her, but looked back towards the classroom as they turned the corner. Her heart dropping a little. The fire was warm. It held very little light, but the embers gave off enough heat for it to be comfortable enough for the swordsman. He listened to the remaining sticks of wood crackle and hiss. For him the night was so full of music, it was like listening to an entire symphony playing just for him. He let out a yawn and scratched his back as he lay out in front of his dying campfire, arm propping up his head. Just as he was about to doze off, the forest went quiet. It was a deathly silence, no rustling of trees or chirping of crickets. Only the ominous thud of heavy footfalls on the ground. The swordsman lazily opened one of his eyes to see a swarm of demons blacker than darkness standing before him. Can this wait till morning? He asked them, to which one of the largest slammed its foot down, smothering the campfire. The swordsman was about to sit up, but another demon took a swing at him with an ethereal sword, which would have cleaved him in two. I guess not, said the swordsman, who had dodged the strike. He held up a hand to stifle his yawn, but seemed in no hurry to wake up. You folks should go back to bed, said the swordsman, cleaning his ear. The demon charged at him with a spear, which the swordsman easily dodged its onslaught of jabs, but misstepped and tripped over a tree root, allowing the spear to slice a hole in his yukata. Well, that's rude, said the swordsman, inspecting the hole. After dusting himself off, he shuffled his feet over to his pack and produced a rusted old naginata, a long glaive-like weapon, and charged into the swarm of demons who snarled at him. After a flurry of strikes, the swordsman stood alone. The demons disappeared one by one, fading back into the shadows. Is it over already? He asked the night, which had resumed its orchestra of sounds. Out of wood already. Guess it's going to be cold night again. The swordsman replaced the naginata back into his pack and found the most comfortable patch of dirt to sleep on. Issei rubbed his chin and thought. So this club is actually a front. Rias nodded her head as she leaned back in her chair behind the desk. We are part of an organization known as God Hunters. Recruits, corrected Kaneko as she put another chip into her mouth. Yes, sighed Rias. We are recruits of the organization known as God Hunters. And what exactly do they do? Asked Issei. Hunt gods. People go about their daily lives believing things of the supernatural to be myth or legends, said Rias. It is our duty to make sure that they keep believing that. Removing anything that would interfere with this routine. Even gods? Asked Issei. Especially gods, said Rias. But how do you kill a god, I wonder, thought Issei out loud. Sacred gear, said Kaneko, munching on another chip. But I thought sacred gears are things given to us by God. Asked Issei, who seemed to be getting more and more confused. They are, but some have the ability to kill a god, said Akeno. But what can kill a god besides a god? It sounds impossible, said Issei, jumping to his feet in frustration. Lance of Longinus, said Kiba, closing his book. What? The weapon said to be coated with the blood of God himself. That which pierced his chest on the cross, said Kiba, walking over to him and put a Bible in his hands. Such a thing exists? Asked Issei. You didn't believe magic and spirit foxes existed until a few moments ago, said Sayori, who had now poked her head into the room. Her hair was still dripping wet from the shower. Do you have a shower in here? Asked Issei. Why not? Asked Rias. I like to keep clean. And I don't mind if other members of the club use it. Thank you, senpai, said Sayori, smiling back at her, but quickly hid from view as she could feel Issei's eyes wander over to the towel wrapped around her body. Ahem. Rias cleared her throat. As I was saying, we believe that you are in possession of one of these powerful sacred gears. Do you think I have the Lance of Longinus inside of me? No, said Rias, getting up from her chair. You don't feel like you have something so holy in you? She put his hand up to her chest again. It feels older. He couldn't believe that she was letting him touch her there. Akeno, could you draw out its power? Asked Rias. Of course, she said, hugging him from behind. Issei's mind went to a dark place. He thought that she felt much larger than Rias. Just relax, cooed Akeno into his ear. And let me do all the work. She rested her chin on his shoulder and drew his left arm up to her mouth. Issei thought he was in ecstasy. He began to blush furiously as he could feel her tongue wrap around each individual finger. His entire body began to warm up. Was Akeno sucking on his fingers turning him on that much? No. Something deep within him was waking up. Suddenly he pushed himself away as his entire left hand began to burn. What's going on? Asked Issei. It feels like my arm is on fire. Did you draw too much of it out at once? Demanded Rias. No, I only drew a fraction of its power out. Everything around him was growing fuzzy. All sounds became muffled as if someone had just put him in a plastic bubble before turning pitch black. When Issei opened his eyes, he looked around to the darkness. He looked around for the others, he was all alone. A tingling sensation on the back of his neck told him otherwise. He spun around to see himself standing before a giant pair of red eyes. So we finally meet, boy, said a booming voice in his head. Who are you? I'm the thing that's inside of you. So you're the sacred gear? Yes and no. I am bound to the sacred gear, but I am not the gear itself. If you call, I will answer, boy. What are you? It paused for a moment, contemplating the question. I was once a ruler of the world where you come from. But now I am no more a ruler of this world than its prisoner. So are you a god? The thing snorted, sending forth a blast of hot air, nearly scorching Issei alive. No. Where am I? Is this a dream? Why did you bring me here? Here? I thought it was you that called me here. What do you want of me? Asked Issei, who felt very uneasy about talking to this thing before him. It laughed at him. You're a funny one. That's a question that I should be asking you. What? The next time we meet, you had best come up with a good answer or else. An answer? Or else what? The thing stretched out its long wings and fully extended itself. Even in the darkness, Issei could make out its dark silhouette. It was a towering western dragon standing before him, its scales seemed to give off a crimson glow in the darkness. It quickly shot its head forward, snapping its jaws at him, its yellow teeth larger than himself. Or else I'm going to eat you. Issei shot up. What the hell kind of nightmare was that? Issei looked around him to find himself back in bed. Was that all just some kind of dream? Sayori, Rias and the others just a part of a dream that he had. It felt much too real to be just a dream. He turned around to look at his alarm clock which was about to go off. He groaned having woken up before his alarm clock as if precious sleep had been lost. He threw his covers off but quickly covered up again, having realized that he was naked. When do I sleep naked? He thought to himself. He looked around his bed to look for his underwear and tried to remember what happened last night. The door opened to reveal a sleepy Sayori rubbing the sleep from her eyes. "Good morning," she yawned. "What are you doing wearing my shirt?" asked Issei, nearly tumbling out of bed, realizing that she was probably wearing nothing but his shirt on. "I didn't have any change of clothes, so I had to borrow one," said Sayori, blinking at him sleepily. "Did you want it back?" "No. No," cried Issei, shielding his eyes as she was about to pull it off. "Good," said Sayori with a smile and climbed into bed with him. "What are you doing?" he asked her as she wrapped her legs around him like a body pillow. "I'm going back to sleep with Ice," she said. "Why? I mean, what are you doing in my house?" he asked. "After Ria-senpai brought you home," said Sayori, who was falling back asleep. "She said to stay with you because I don't have anywhere else to go." "Stay with me?" asked Issei. "Where did you sleep?" "With you," she mumbled into his sheets. "Slept with you all night. Does that mean ... you don't mean ... stuttered Issei. "Idiot," mumbled Sayori before falling fast asleep. He could hear several footsteps thundering up the stairs. His mom was on her way to his room to find a girl asleep in his bed. "Ice, are you still in bed?" called his mom. I'm up. Don't come in. You're in high school now, you shouldn't have to rely on your mother to wake you up all the time." Honestly. The doorknob turned. Issei did the only thing he could, he flung the covers back over him, hiding Sayori from view. The moment the door flung open. "I knew it. Still in bed. I've been up." "Doing what? Are you dressed for school yet?" She marched over to his bed and yanked off the covers. She screamed. "Oka-san," called up his father. "What happened?" She stammered. "I am going to get it now," thought Issei, looking over at Sayori who was still wrapped around him. She blinked lazily up at his mother. "He's what?" called his father from downstairs. "He's sleeping naked." "Oh. Kids nowadays. Can she really not see her?" he thought. He looked over to his computer screen to see the reflection of himself lying there naked, but no girl next to him at all. His mother quickly spun around but continued to lecture him. "Hurry up and get dressed. Breakfast is already on the table." "Good morning," called Sayori from the hallway. "Good morning, Sayori," called his mother. "Don't come in here." His mother glanced over her shoulder to glare at him. "Honestly. Sleeping naked the night your cousin starts living with us. What is wrong with you?" Issei was at a loss for words as he saw Sayori standing at the threshold already dressed for school. He looked over to his side to see the other Sayori still sleeping next to him. What is going on? His mother quickly left the room, pushing Sayori past his room and down the stairs. All the while continuing to complain about indecent things. "I ask for a daughter and you give me a son. This is all your fault." Issei could hear his mother complaining to his father. After the commotion had died down, Issei turned his attention back to Sayori. He managed to pull his arm out of her grasp and fell out of bed. Finally waking, she rubbed her eyes and looked down at him, who quickly shielded his nakedness. "Is it time to wake up already? What did you do?" he asked, digging out a fresh pair of underwear from his dresser. "Oh, I used a little bit of magic. I thought it would be trouble if your mother saw us sleeping together. Why do my parents think that you are my cousin?" She stretched out her body much like how a cat or dog would after waking up. Ria's altered their memories while they were sleeping. "Oh, I see," as he pulled his shirt over his head. "Aren't you going to get ready?" "I am ready," said Sayori, crawling around the bed in a circle before curling up into a ball on his bed, wrapping her tail around her body. "You're sending your double?" asked Issei, finally pulling on his school jacket. "I need to get a lot of rest, it took a lot out of me to heal your wounds." "Heal my wounds? What happened yesterday?" "You're going to be late," she said, pointing over at the clock without so much as lifting her head. "Oh crap." He quickly dashed downstairs and hurriedly piled the breakfast into his mouth while listening to the lectures from his parents about living with a girl. On the walk to school, Issei couldn't help but keep looking over at the girl walking next to him. "What's wrong?" she asked him. "Is there something on my face?" "Are you really Sayori?" She smiled back at him. "Oh, is that it? I am a copy of Sayori, but continue to treat me as if I am she." She took his arm. The walk to school was uneasy. He could feel the eyes of everyone staring at him, making him uncomfortable. "What's wrong?" Sayori asked him. "If we are supposed to be cousins, you shouldn't be hanging off my arm like that. But isn't that what cousins do? People are going to think we are going out or something." "Oh. Well, I don't mind," she said cheerfully. Issei felt like this day couldn't get any worse. But as the day progressed, word had spread about Issei's supposed cousin transferring to their school. Unsurprisingly, she had become extremely popular with the girls and boys because of her cute looks and cheerful nature. Everyone would have thought this was something out of a dating game or something if they hadn't seen her with their own eyes. She had quickly become one of the most popular girls in their class. After telling the entire class she was living with him, the entire school seemed to be in an uproar. Feeling like they should look over her, the girls gave her pointers about keeping her room locked or checking to make sure Issei didn't do any perverted things to her. And the boys decided to either glare at him or strangle him out of jealousy. Issei couldn't believe that the day was finally over. He retreated to the only sanctuary he knew of on campus, the club room. He plopped himself in the nearest open seat and stared up at the ceiling. Aside from the faint tapping of keys from Gasper's corner, he could hear the faint sound of the shower running. He began to imagine walking in on the president during her daily showers at school. He carefully tiptoed over, but was met with Kaneko standing guard. "Pervert," she said, punching her fist into her open hand. "Oh no, I thought I saw a fly." "Just now," said Issei, quickly retreating. He could just imagine what would happen to him if he dared get any closer. He plopped himself down on a sofa across from Kiba, who was reading a different book this time. "Ice-kun," said a voice from behind him. Before he could react, Sayori jumped over him and landed on his lap, causing him to double over. "Looks like fun," said Akeno, smiling down at him. Before he could imagine having such a beautiful woman in his lap, Sayori pulled his ear hard. "Ow," he said, massaging it while watching her climb off his lap and onto the sofa next to him. "What was that for?" "You were thinking perverted thoughts," said Sayori, pouting at him. "I was not." "You were going to." "No, I wasn't. I can read minds." "Idiot." "Bingo," yelled Gasper from his corner. "Huh?" asked Issei, trying to push Sayori off of him as she had begun to pull his cheeks. "You found one?" asked Riaz, walking into the room. Her hair still wet from the shower. He nodded his head. "I forgot he was even here," said Issei. "He?" asked Sayori, pointing at Gasper. "She is actually a he," said Issei. "He doesn't seem to leave the club room much and just stares at the computer screen." "What does he do?" asked Sayori. Actually I am not sure what he does," said Issei, thinking about it. "Gasper is in charge of monitoring spiritual energy," said Riaz, wrapping her arms around Issei from behind. "It is how we were able to keep track of you and Sayori." "Oh," said Issei, who seemed to be more preoccupied with the smell of her wet hair. "Gasper, if you would," said Riaz, sitting down at her desk while the others gathered around. But Gasper had quickly closed the flaps of his box, which was now shaking very violently. Kaneko picked up his box and placed it on the desk. He poked out a small projector from a hole and projected an image on the whiteboard. "This is where," he nervously said. With every word his box began to shake more and more violently. "What's wrong?" asked Sayori. "He's scared of people," said Riaz, patting his box gently. "Especially in groups." Kaneko began to shake the box violently, which caused the boy inside to scream. "Out," she said in her monotonous voice. "Stop that," yelled Issei. "That isn't helping." "Are you alright?" asked Sayori, putting her head next to the carry handle of the box. "You don't like people, huh? Is it okay if I put a little friend in there to keep you company?" "Don't worry, she doesn't bite." Everyone watched as Sayori pulled out a strand of hair which turned into a little fox in her hands. She carefully opened the flaps of the box and placed the tiny fox inside. "Cute," yelled Gasper from inside his box. From within the box they could hear laughter followed by the fox's yips. It wasn't long before a tiny fox poked its head up, followed cautiously by the boy whose head she was sitting on. "It looks like she likes you," said Sayori, beaming at them. "Thank you," said Gasper, no louder than a whisper. The fox yipped happily. "Are you ready, Gasper?" asked Riaz calmly to him. He looked up at the fox on his head, who looked back down at him. He took a deep breath and continued with his presentation. Although it was very soft, it was better than listening to him struggle to get a single word out. "There has been a spike in demonic activity in the last hour," he said, showing a map of the town. Using several chibi characters, he marked the location of demons just outside of town in the forest. It was followed by a huge spike of spiritual energy that eliminated the demonic activity. A chibi ghost appeared near the demon group. The ghost approached the demons, had a slap fight with them, causing the demons to disappear. It lasted for all of 15 seconds and disappeared. "Has there been any other activity since?" asked Riaz. "None," said Gasper, who was now hugging the fox, hiding half of his face. He looked over to Sayori and held up the fox for her to take back. "I think she would rather stay with you," she said, smiling back at him. The fox yipped in agreement. "Thank you," said Gasper, hugging the fox, which was now licking his face. "Thank you, Gasper," said Riaz, patting him on the head. "You can go back to your box now." He nodded his head and let Kaneko carry him back to his corner. "Thank you, Sayori," said Riaz. I have never heard Gasper say so much before. No, it was nothing," said Sayori, feeling embarrassed. She looked over to Issei, who smiled brightly at her, making her blush even more. "President, are we going to investigate?" asked Kiba. Riaz thought for a moment. "I doubt that source of spiritual energy will still be there, but it won't hurt to have a look." "Alright," said Issei, pumping his fist at his first mission. He made his way towards the door. "Where are you going?" asked Riaz. "Huh? Aren't we going to go have a look?" he asked. Riaz and the others waited in a corner of the room which now seemed to be glowing red. He blinked several times and noticed a large ruin traced on the floor. Was that always there? "Magic circle," said Kaneko, putting a lollipop in her mouth. He walked over and stood next to Riaz, who took his hand. "Try not to move," she said with a smile. As soon as her words had left her mouth, Issei could feel himself getting pulled away from the ground. Before he had time to scream, he felt his feet slam into the ground, buckling his knees. He looked up at Riaz, who was still standing straight. She was stronger than she looked. "Spread out and search for clues," she told the others. Issei found himself not in the club room but in the middle of the forest surrounded by trees. Even though it seemed like any other night, something about it felt eerie and unwelcoming. An unnatural mist seemed to be coming from somewhere. "Ice, stay close to me," she whispered in his ear, not letting go of his hand. "Right," he replied. Even though he was scared, Riaz seemed unnerved by the darkness. It was pitch black. He wondered how anyone could see anything more than 10 feet in front of him. But the others seemed to be moving perfectly fine, as if it were as bright as day to them. "Over here," called out Kiba from somewhere in the darkness. He felt himself led by Riaz, who seemed to know exactly where he was. After a brief walk, he and the others found themselves around an extinguished campfire. It looked like it had just been extinguished no more than a few moments ago. "The coals are still warm," said Kiba, his hand hovering over them. "Looks like whoever it was left in a hurry." "Their tracks lead that way," said Sayori, who now had her fox ears and tail. "It smells human." In a flash, Kaneko lunged at Issei, her fist just missing his face by a hair. He turned around to see a kunai made up of light in her fist. It glowed brightly for a moment before fizzling out in her hand, turning to ash. "Odd hunter pups should keep their noses out if they know what's good for them, yo," said a man in the forest. "Show yourself," demanded Riaz. "That was a warning, the next one is for real, yo." "I am Riaz Gremory," said Riaz, stepping forward. "This place is under my jurisdiction and I demand that you show yourself at once." "What strong words for such a pretty face, yo," said the man, who seemed to be coming from behind them now. The lanky man stepped out of the shadows and into what little moonlight there was peering through the trees. He had on jeans with a chain around his waist, black leather jacket over his bare scared chest with a collar around his neck with several links of chain. He ran his fingers through his black spiked greasy hair. "Where are my manners?" said the man with a devilish grin. "Name is Andres, yo. What business do you have here?" asked Riaz. "Same as you," said Andres, bending over the extinguished campfire. "Looking for the fellow who left this. Now run along before I have to call your parents, yo." But Riaz held her ground. "Little birds should be careful or else they get their little wings clipped." The man grinned up at her. He slowly stood up to his full height, which towered over everyone. He spread out a pair of black wings which Issei hadn't noticed before. His wings ominously swallowed up the moonlight, making everything darker. "Run along, it is past your bedtime," said the man, folding up his wings again till they disappeared on his back. "We'll play again sometime, yo." He put his hands in his pockets and walked off until he disappeared into the night. "What was that all about?" asked Issei. "He's a fallen angel," whispered Riaz, whose eyes were scanning the trees. "How many?" "Too many," said Akeno, who was also scanning the trees. Issei wanted to ask more questions but thought better of it and looked to the trees as well. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he was sure he would know when he saw it. Jumping from limb to limb, he saw them, black shadows with glowing red eyes. Demons. All at once they jumped for the trees and began to attack them. Kiba drew his sword and jumped high in the air, cutting down as many as he could before they landed on the ground. Kaneko blocked a punch of a large demon with her arms, causing a small crater to form in the process. She quickly grabbed it and tossed it back into the oncoming horde, taking out a few as it went flying through the air. Akeno began tracing ruins in the air, summoning lightning strikes from the cloudless sky. Sayori pulled several strands of hair and tossed them into the air, turning them into copies of herself. Each throwing balls of magic fire or striking at demons with her claws. Riaz had her arms folded across her chest and calmly watched them fight the demons. Issei took a step forward wanting to help, but she held him back. He had never felt more helpless or useless in his life. Several demons tried to sneak up behind Riaz, but they quickly disappeared in red flame. Issei didn't even see her move. "Can't we do something?" asked Issei, feeling frustrated. "They can take care of themselves," said Riaz, watching the fight. "We have to wait for their leader to appear." "Their leader?" asked Issei, watching Kiba cut a demon in two. "It is usually the last to appear," said Riaz. She spun around, seeing a massive demon twice as tall as they were swing a huge club. Issei shielded himself with his arms but realized that the club had stopped a few feet above him. Some kind of magical barrier was protecting himself and Riaz from harm. The demon staggered back for a moment before swinging its club again. This time the barrier had cracked. "Move!" cried Riaz, trying to push Issei out of the way. But the demon had quickly swung its club, catching Issei in the chest, sending him flying into a nearby tree. "Issei." He heard Ria's call out to him before fading into blackness. He slowly opened his eyes, the pain in his body was gone. The air all around him felt warm, it was quite soothing. He slowly picked himself up and found himself alone in the darkness. "President. Sayori." He called out to them. But there was no response. He was all alone. "So we meet again, boy," said a familiar rumbling voice. "It's you," said Issei, turning around to find himself face to face with the red dragon again. "Have you an answer for me?" Issei, though, for a moment looking down at his own two hands which he had formed fists. "I want," he began, arms shaking now. "What?" "I want to protect." "You want to protect what, boy?" "Your friends. You can't even protect yourself." Without even thinking, he swung his left fist forward, throwing a jab at the dragon. He knew it wasn't going to do much good, but he figured it would make him feel better. He missed and fell over face first to the ground. "You have to do better than that, boy," taunted the dragon. "How can you be a protector when you can't even fight?" "I am going to protect everyone," Issei screamed at the dragon. He jumped back up to his feet, feeling more pissed off than before. He tightened his fist even more, this time throwing a wild haymaker. His fist connected with the tip of the dragon's nose. His entire arm began to burn, it felt like it was thrust into furnace. He fell to his knees screaming in pain. "That's better, boy," said the dragon, watching over him. "Use that resolve to save your friends." Issei opened his eyes to see himself reflected in Sayori's golden eyes. It looked as if all of the blood had been drained of her face. "You're alive." He looked down at his chest, expecting it to be a gory mess, but only his shirt had been torn open. He looked up at Sayori, whose eyes flicked over to his left arm. There he saw his arm had been transformed into some kind of red gauntlet with a green core on the top of his hand. As if instinctively knowing what to do, he picked himself up and threw a punch at the nearest demon. Its head seemed to go flying off its body, which crumpled to the ground. He felt a sudden surge of power flow through his entire body. A demon coming from behind him swung a sword at him, which he deflected with his arm, shattering it. The demon scurried away and disappeared into the shadows. Seeing Rias being attacked by the massive demon, he sprinted forward. Again he felt another surge of power flowing through him. After 2 bounds he was already at the demon's tree trunk-like legs, where he threw his shoulder into it, knocking the demon off balance. "Issei!" exclaimed Rias, shocked that he was still alive. The demon quickly jumped back up to its feet and quickly brought its massive club down on Issei, who barely managed to catch it. He felt a surge of power again as he and the demon began a tug-of-war with the club. "President," called out Issei, quickly releasing the club, making the demon stagger backwards. With a quick motion of her hand, the demon leader was quickly engulfed in red flames, making it flail about. Issei jumped up and landed the final blow, destroying the massive demon. Seeing their leader fall, the smaller demons quickly retreated back into the shadows. The calmness of the night returned as the haze in the forest dispersed. "Boost gear," said Rias, holding up Issei's left hand to inspect the gauntlet better. "The gauntlet of the Red Dragon Emperor," said Sayori, awestruck. "Red Dragon. Began Issei, but collapsed. Rias quickly caught him before he fell to the ground. "Are we going to make this a habit? Is he unconscious?" asked Sayori. "No, he's sleeping," said Rias, smiling down at him in his arms. "I'd say he's earned it." She kissed him on his forehead. From high up at the trees, a man in a yukata looked down at the scene. "That's interesting," he said, heaving the heavy pack on his shoulder. "So the Red Dragon Emperor has returned, eh? This really is getting interesting." He laughed to himself. End of the here. So that's it for today's video, guys. Before you go, just like the video and share it with your friends. Bye.